Hello everybody and welcome to Thursday, May 6, 2021. Mr. Parrott here with your rundown of what we're doing in science today. We're going to be talking about a couple of cycles. So first and foremost, make sure that you get your bell ringer answered up. Make sure you've answered them up in the past as well in case you've forgotten them. And we're going to be covering the water cycle, which some of you are probably familiar with. I don't remember what grade it ever is, but some of you have a water cycle song that you always sing to me every single year. So you seem familiar with the water cycle. And then we'll also talk about the nitrogen cycle today. So those are two out of our three cycles. Tomorrow we'll talk about the carbon cycle and what it provides for us. But today we're doing the water cycle and nitrogen cycle. So let's do it to it. Oh, I need to switch. Not just hit forward on that one. So this is part 5. It'll look like this in the notes. Hopefully you got a copy of them with you at this point. If not, there's a blank one in the very first week that we covered this stuff. The first thing is that we're going to go through the diagram that's on there and label our diagram. First thing we got at the bottom left, we got our oceans. Biggest area that supplies our water is usually the oceans. We then got evaporation happening off of that, causing the water to turn into gas. It also can happen on land. Usually if it happens on land, it is called transpiration, but we'll also call it evaporation. It's the same thing. It's just happening, whether it's happening on water or off of the land itself. They're both evaporation for our purposes, but it is called transpiration. So if you ever see that, that just means that it's coming off of the land. Transpiration, evaporation, similar kind of deals. Water into gas. And then we got condensation, which happens on two different points there. One right below me, the other one on the other side. That's where the water vapor condenses, comes down, gets closer together to form a cloud. The cloud gets too heavy with the rain droplets up there. It is going to precipitate. The gas going back into the liquid for condensation, forming the clouds. Enough of that condensation gets done. We got precipitation. Rain falls down. Precipitation can happen in multiple forms. Rain, sleet, hail, snow, to name a few, would be our different ways of precipitating. And once it hits the ground, there's two ways that it can do. It can run off, which means that it basically doesn't get absorbed in the water and will form like our rivers, lakes, and streams. Or not lakes, rivers, streams, creeks, those areas where it just stays on the surface. That'd be surface runoff. And then if it does absorb into it, it becomes what we call groundwater, which will eventually, both of those methods will work towards going back into the oceans, depositing itself into lakes, wherever that it ends up being. And then it's going to start it all again. It's a cycle after all. So what are the different things and what it does? Evaporation is where water basically leaves the surface, enters the atmosphere, goes from a liquid to a gas. The water then is going to eventually return to the surface through precipitation. We went through some examples of precipitation. Oceans is where a majority of our water is located. Condensation, you take the evaporated parts and you're going to bring them together to form the liquid parts again. Groundwater is when it soaks into the dirt and soil. Runoff is when it does not soak into the soil, but instead stays on the surface and goes to the nearest water source to collect. Sometimes that's just a pool in the backyard. Sometimes that could be a river, lake, stream, those kind of things before eventually going into the ocean. There's a little picture showing the water cycle in action. Steam rising up, rain coming down. Sun is the driving factor behind all this. Without the sun, the water cycle would not move because it wouldn't heat up. You need the sun to heat the water up. A little video on the water cycle. Can't show it for reasons. You'll have to watch it yourself on there in the link going on in it. Next up, we've got our nitrogen cycle there. That's the bottom half, our second half of what we're doing today. So let's go ahead and do the diagrams here with it. First thing that we have, well, I'm just going to put it up because I want the nitrogen gas to be the first thing that we talk about because that's in the air. the air that we breathe is 98% nitrogen, but we cannot use the nitrogen in its current form. It needs to be what we call fixed for our purposes. So we don't really use the nitrogen that's in the air. We need it in a different form. So a couple of ways that that'll happen is that nitrogen in the air is going to get absorbed by bacteria. And there's two ways that can get absorbed by bacteria. It is bacteria that happens in the ground, and sometimes bacteria that are on the roots of plants that nitrogen gas will go into. So bacteria is what bacteria are actually going to help us in the cycle. Bacteria is going to absorb the nitrogen and then also absorb the nitrogen that's in the soil as well. It is then going to go through this process of nitrogen fixation, which nitrogen fixation is where the nitrogen is going to get converted into what is called a nitrate. So then once again get converted into a nitrite later on. It's just different forms that have nitrogen and oxygen compared to it. But it's stuff that we can use. So basically the bacteria goes through this process of nitrogen fixation, which will convert the nitrogen into things that we can use. Mainly it goes, you can see right here, let me get my little laser, there we go, little laser. It is going to go back to the plants then. When we eat the plants, we are getting the nitrogen. Or when the herbivores eat the plants, they get the nitrogen. When the carnivores come along and eat the herbivores, they're getting their nitrogen through eating the herbivore which ate the plant. It's our whole food chain stuff linked back again here. There's a couple of other ways that nitrogen can get into the soil for the bacteria to fix it for us. You have nitrogen in your waste, which is why it makes for a good fertilizer, because it can help out those plants here with it. But waste is one of the ways with it. Decomposition. Decomposers help to return nitrogen to the soil. We mentioned that they're recycling things in nature. Decomposition or decomposers will do that role. And then if the nitrogen doesn't get used, eventually the bacteria can also just release it back into the air where normally it is found, as just free nitrogen just kind of hovering above up there. So some other factoids about our nitrogen cycle. As I said, it makes up a majority of our air. About 78-79% is usually what that's hovering around. When it's just in the air and not combined with anything, it's just called free nitrogen. We need it combined with other things in order for our bodies to handle it. So the free nitrogen is not the version that we would use. We need that to get fixed, and we call that nitrogen fixation, which comes along and fixes and changes our nitrogen into something that is usable. It's carried out by bacteria, so we have bacteria to thank for that. We can get more nitrogen to come back into the soil by waste and by decomposition as well. Bacteria can also send it back up into the air, as we kind of mentioned in the cycle. This is just written out in word form, so that you can have the word form of the descriptions next to the diagram there. Here's a nice little example of our nitrogen cycle, a little video. I can't play it for you, so you'll have to play it. It's 3.5 minutes there. It's a good one. And this is where we'll start off on Friday with the carbon cycle, and just talk a little bit about the carbon cycle and kind of what goes through with that. So a very quick process for our carbon cycle. We'll leave that for tomorrow, though. Let's look at your assignment for today. Boop. Right over in the Schoology in the Thursday folder, it is the water/nitrogen cycle worksheet. When you open it up, it'll got questions about your different cycles, multiple choice. You have these diagrams in there. It'll give you numbers, so you gotta make sure what number represents what, and you can put them in there. We've got our nitrogen cycle picture, labeling the nitrogen cycle. You'll need to read this little blurb, answer some questions about our water cycle, and some more multiple choice questions in there. You got 2 attempts when you're going through it, so make sure that you use both of them. Use those wisely, because we ain't got too many grades left, because there's not that much longer of school, so make sure you're taking full advantage of every opportunity that you are given with that stuff. But I hope you're doing well, staying safe on everything, and I will see you hopefully next week, because we're running out of weeks here, so hopefully you're coming back to us. If not, then you're doing your work that you need to get done for the rest of the year, and that you're taking care of yourself, doing well, staying safe. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can always email me. But that'll do it for it, so hope you're doing well, staying safe. See ya.